go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down. You want to get up to the joy, you've got to go down deep Get up to the joy you've got to go down deep. So go down, go down, go down.
That was a nice way to start. Good morning, and welcome to worship here at Seaview, which stands for Coastal Virginia Unitarian Universalists. My name is Carrie Kilburn, and I'm a member of the board. For those of you who are newcomers today, whether here in person or in Zoom, Seaview is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association, a denomination that is part of a liberal religious tradition that goes back hundreds of years. Seaview offers an open door to all who recognize and honor our principles and the values from which they are derived: interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, justice, and love, which is at the center of our values. These are values which call us to action and which make us accountable to one another. Here at Seaview, our commitment to the work we are called to do through these values is demonstrated in our mission, which is to provide a nurturing community, foster courageous spiritual growth, and inspire compassionate action. It is with that love and commitment that we welcome all of you, members, friends, visitors, and everyone in between, to worship at Seaview and be part of this journey with us. Our worship theme this month is Deep Listening, and the title of today's service is Universalism, Past, Present, and Powerful, and it will be led by Reverend Kalen Fristad, who will be proclaiming the very hopeful message of universalism. Also assisting with the worship today are Martha Shore, our worship services associate, Crystal Lennon, our music director, Reverend Mark Weiss, our director of Lifespan Faith Development, and of course, the choir. For the time being, for those of you who prefer to mask and who prefer to sit with others who mask, we've set aside the balcony as mask-only seating during the worship service. This does not mean that people who want to mask can't sit wherever they want, but we want to make sure that the people who want or need to mask can feel comfortable in our space. This is just one more of the many ways that we can be welcome and inclusive to the many individuals who want to be an active part of this community. For those who want to sit in the balcony and who do not have masks with them, some masks have been provided for your convenience. After the service, you're all invited to attend an in-person coffee hour in the social hall. Next week, the title of the service is Be Still, Be Humble, and it will be led by Taryn Myers. I hope you will join us.
Why can't we get together? captain and the sailor and the rest of the crew says, I love you. There are only 8 little letters in this phrase you'll find. But they mean a lot more than all the other words combined. Everywhere, the whole world through, the king in the palace and the peasant too, the tiger in the jungle and the monk in the zoo says, I love you.
Aren't we lucky to have such a great choir? Our opening words this morning are from John Murray. You may not know, but his namesake retreat center is a UU center, and it's in New Jersey, and it's awesome. Go out into the highways and byways. Give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it. Let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach kindness and everlasting love of God. Let us worship together. Today, our chalice, as normal, the Unitarian Universalists most around the world open their services by lighting a chalice. Today, our chalice will be lit by Kat. Yay! Kat is the mom of Oliver and Xavier and godmom to Addie. She likes yellow. I don't know what her favorite game is. If you would repeat the words of chalice lighting. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. And now, if you are willing and able, please join in the opening hymn, How Could Anyone? Now comes the time in our service when we honor the personal joys and sorrows of the members of this community. And before you leave after the service today, if you did not do so on your way in, please take a moment to place a stone or shell in the bowl in the back of the sanctuary on my right, or on the first floor, but on the second floor, it's up on the left-hand side. For those of you in Zoom, If you have a personal joy or sorrow you would like to share with our Seaview community, please type it into the chat below on the bottom of your screen, and we will make every effort to get those into the Book of Life. May each of us draw upon whatever gives us strength and hope, whether it is the God of many names or no name at all, the great force that comes throughout and is the universe, the divine spark within each of us, or the community that we love and value, as we hold in our hearts all that has been spoken in this space, knowing that some concerns are held in quiet and in our hearts. May we, in particular, find solace in the fact that we are here to journey together with one another, to share in the joys and rejoice in the joys and to share our sorrows. And now let us enter into a moment of silence to mark this sacred space that we share. We will now close our silence and honor the different faith journeys that we represent here in song. I have the reflection today. Some of you may have heard some of this story before. I apologize if you have. When I was growing up, I attended the palatial Highland Avenue Methodist Church in Memphis, Tennessee, on the corner of Poplar Avenue and Highland. As an only child of a working mom, at a time when that was pretty unusual, it was the only place that provided community for me outside of school. I was nurtured there and thoroughly confused by the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. When I went to college, I worked at the Wesley Foundation, the Methodist youth organization, and studied theologians Martin Buber and Paul Tillich, who plowed the ground for my later Universalism. I also found a community of students who emboldened me to participate in the civil rights movement. I was still confused by the Trinity and even more frustrated by the local Methodist church that we went to on Sundays, not on Wednesdays, which was the Wesley Foundation, when they kicked me out because I brought a friend who was Black. After that, it was kind of hard being a Methodist, but I didn't know what else to do. My husband, on the other hand, grew up sort of scarred by the fact that his father forced him to go to the Church of Christ. There were people there like Aunt Sweetie that took good care of him, but still, he was scarred. When we moved to Imperial Beach, he tolerated the Methodist church there because they cared for me when he was on deployment with the Navy. I there found a joyous community that celebrated together, and they worked hard together too to support the farm workers movement and the food pantry for homeless teens who had gone to the Mexican mecca of marijuana and gotten kicked out and found themselves on the street of San Diego and Imperial Beach. So that was a great time to feel protected and connected to a community of faith. When we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, we went to the Glen Acres Methodist Church, another palatial building, seeking community, especially for our kids who were preschoolers at that point. What we got was a hellfire and damnation sermon. Oops, too close to the country church of Christ. And when we went to pick up our preschoolers, one teacher, I know this is not all teachers, but one teacher, Sunday school teacher, had told them they had not worn the proper footwear for God's house. I was not confused at this point. I was mad. And I told my kids not to worry. They wouldn't have let Jesus in there either because he wore sandals and they were probably dusty. We were unchurched for a while. I visited a few other churches, but it was hard to find the right community for a young Navy family in Jacksonville, surprisingly. I did go to a candidates forum for the mayoral candidates at the Unitarian Universalist Church on a Friday night. The folks there were friendly, and they invited me to attend a Friday night series on transactional analysis, and then on Reiki, and then another one on Friday nights. Finally, they got around to inviting me to come to Sunday church. Well, lo and behold, it was about John Murray's awakening to Universalism. I think he was Calvinist to start out with, I forgot. I thought I had found the easy button for church. No more Trinity, Unitarian, and Universalism. Universal salvation, that had been a question for me all of my life. Why would somebody who never got the message be damned to hell? I just couldn't understand it. Easy indeed. As it turned out, that UU church was a fine and easy place to find community and acceptance, even for my scarred, I will never step foot in another church ever husband. As I grew in the newfound comfort of the Unitarian Universalist community, and I studied Hosea Ballou and John Murray and Forest Church, I figured out, oh, wait, might not be quite as easy as I thought, because the easy button had a flip side called responsibility or radical inclusion or universal salvation. And I had to acknowledge that that meant everyone got salvation. No exceptions, including the person on the board by then that didn't agree with me most of the time. And even that teacher who had a bad day in Jacksonville and told my kids something that just didn't fly. I scorned that teacher, but my universalism kind of helped me understand that we all have bad days. The hard part about universal was that the comfort I found also challenged me to do the hard work of stretching my heart and my mind. That easy button also gave me the responsibility of doing my part, even the smallest part, in healing the wounds of the world by filling the world with kindness and love and justice. and radical hospitality. I challenge you to live up to our universalism.
Come on up front, youth. I hate following these reflections. They're so great. So, come on, youth. I see you hiding back there. I love when we read from the Book of Life, because this morning it shows perfectly well what a community really is. It has its joys and it has its sorrows. But everyone is here to support every other person in their joys and in their sorrows. From Owen to Jackson to hopefully that teacher. So that's why we do community. So we're talking about universalism again. Of course, everyone knows that John Murray's not my favorite. Hosea Ballou is. So the question is, both my young and young at hearts, did anyone ever tell you, I can still remember it, but see if you remember it, you need to be kind? How many have always heard either their parent or their grandparent saying, you need to be kind to other people? Come on. Yes, Julia, I know you. So yeah. So what happens when you're not? How does it make you feel? Even though you try, how does it make you feel?
It depends on if you want to be mean or not.
Okay. What if you're trying not to be mean, but it just comes out that way?
Then I feel guilty.
Okay. The guilt, we carry the guilt with us. How many have carried guilt with them throughout their lives, one way or another? Now, the good part is I love how this front row, except you, Kat, I'm sorry, who are so young, they're like, they didn't raise their hand, which is great. Keep knowing that innocence. Does anyone know the golden rule? You want to tell us, Dave? No?
Treat others how you want to be treated.
Yep, treat others how you want to be treated. So, if you want people to be kind to you, you need to be kind to them. What happens when you're extremely kind and the other person isn't? We're seeing a lot of this kind of behavior. Anyone want to? Get my exercise.
We feel sorry for them, but we send them our love anyway.
I have to truthfully say, I probably don't send them my love. And that may be the human ego getting in the way. But yeah, we try, right?
In true Southern fashion, I say, bless their heart and move on.
And we know what bless their heart means in Southern language. Yes. So the ego gets in the way, and yeah, it's hard to, you may feel sorry for them, but then there's a part of you that, I don't really like you or love you. And maybe that's the human condition that we've been brought up in, that if someone is so different from ourselves, it's either this or this, instead of the universalism of coming together. So think about the next time, and there will be many, when you run across that person and you're trying your darndest to love them, but they're not giving it back. Keep in mind that teacher might have been a bad day, and shake it off and send love to the universe. Blessed be. Thank you.
Now comes the time in our service when we invite you to make financial gifts to the benefit and to sustain, my S's have left this morning, the ongoing ministry of this church. And the ministry of this church consists not only of what we do in these walls, both real and virtual, but what we do that extends beyond the walls as well. One of the ways that we do this is through our generosity. Each month, we share 50% of the money that is collected in the offering that is not designated as a pledge payment. It is hoped that this will lead to greater connections and wider impact. The name of the organization that we are giving to this month, one that should be familiar to all of us, is the Food Bank of Southeast Virginia in the Eastern Shore. In 1981, with a $50,000 USDA grant, some good people who recognized the issue of hunger on the South Side came together to address it. Fast forward to today, and the Food Bank of Southeast Virginia and the Eastern Shore, through its program and far-reaching network of community partners, works to eliminate hunger. And in 4,745 square mile service area, their mission is to eliminate hunger for a lifetime. Seaview, where I'm proud to say, is a partner agency that is a recipient of food bank from the food bank for our community table and sandwich makers, and a donor of money and non-perishable foods collected here at the church. In a circle of support, we work together to push back against hunger in our neighborhood. We have representatives here today. Beth Brooker, who's is partner relations manager, and Rocky, is that right? And they've been so kind that they are willing to be with us this afternoon after the service so that you'll be able to talk with them. And maybe Julie will sit with you and them too and tell you how we had chicken last week that was from the food bank for our 72 people, 72 meals that we had. So thank you for being here. Supporting organizations such as this one is one way for our principles for us to live into our principles and honor the inherent worth and dignity of all the people, and justice and equity and compassion in all human relations. Giving our time and talent and treasure to these organizations that matter to us is a way to improve our lives and the lives of others. It's a spiritual practice for those of us who call ourselves Unitarian Universalists. And it is one that we should not shy away from. More importantly, it is necessary for our survival. I give because this place provides a community that supports me and gives me a chance to feel like I can make, with my little piece of our whole, more impact in our community. Hope you feel that too. Your generosity is greatly appreciated and will be carefully stewarded. We are very fortunate this morning to have Reverend Kalen Fristad here to give us a sermon on Unitarian Universalists. I dare say that he might do a lot more, or not Unitarian, but Universalism. He's done a lot more study than most of us have on Universalism. He has been a Methodist minister for more than 40 years and is a member of the Unitarian Universalist Christian Fellowship. He traveled the country full-time with his wife, Darlene, who's lovely, and you'll be able to meet her after the service, from 2003 to 2006, accepting invitations to speak at churches, proclaiming the hopeful message of Universalism. Boy, do we need that. Following that, he served churches in Iowa half-time while spending half-time on the road. He retired from parish ministry in 2013, but continues to travel around the country speaking on Universalism. Over the years, he's spoken at more than 260 UU churches. Reverend Kalen has written a book on Universalism called Destined for Salvation, and a study book with the same title. His books, CDs, and DVDs will be available for purchase after the service. In addition to speaking on the history of Universalism, Reverend Kalen will be relating that the teaching of eternal damnation is not merely harmful, I read this, honest to God, I did. All right, let's try this again. We'll be relating that the teaching of eternal damnation is not merely a harmless untruth that we might appropriately ignore and allow to stand, but it has serious consequences. It leads to the possibility, perhaps even the inevitability, of wars, bigotry, oppression, abuse. On the other hand, the teaching of Universalism leads to equality, respect, love, and dignity for all. Please welcome Reverend Kalen Fristad.
It's a high privilege and pleasure for me to be with you today. She mentioned that I'd spoken at more than 260 UU churches, and it just happened this last week. I thought, well, I wonder exactly how many UU churches have I spoken at. I discovered that this church is the 270th UU church at which I have spoken. I love UU churches. The diversity that you celebrate and encourage in your congregations is something wonderful. And so I'm very happy that I am a United Methodist minister, but I always feel very much at home in UU churches. When I served the United Methodist Church in Dallas Center, Iowa, I became acquainted with the UU minister in Des Moines. And when she realized that I believed in Universalism, she invited me to attend a special service that the church was going to be having. It was going to be in the small town of Mitchellville, which is a few miles east of Des Moines, and it was going to be in a church building that originally housed a Universalist congregation. There was not a congregation there anymore, but that church in Des Moines had the tradition of having one service out at that church building in Mitchellville, one service each summer as a way of celebrating their Universalist heritage. So I was happy to accept her invitation to join them for that service. And I'll always remember when I walked up the walk in front of that church, over the door it read, Universalist Church. And I thought, I have arrived at home. Universalism has been really important to me for a long time, and that's why I wrote a book on the subject. And for the last 21 years, time flies when you're having fun, right? But for the last 21 years, we've at least full-time or half-time, we've traveled the country where I've had the privilege of speaking at churches on the subject of Universalism in all 48 contiguous states. Today I'm going to be speaking on the history and the significance of the teaching of Universalism. It is sometimes referred to as universal salvation. So I'd like to offer a definition of salvation that you probably have not heard before. You probably are aware that at least among conservative Christians, their definition of salvation would be to accept Jesus as your personal Savior so you can go to heaven when you die. Well, apparently that definition works for many people, but to me it's not very adequate because it doesn't necessarily involve any change or growth. So I've come up with a definition that works for me, and that is salvation is to learn and grow either with or without divine influence so as to experience fullness of life in this life and beyond. Okay. And if you don't believe in the divine, or if you don't believe in life after death, you can just leave those parts off the definition. So to me, the most basic understanding of salvation is to learn and grow so as to experience fullness of life. So in contrast to what a lot of people believe, I reject the idea that a lot of people are going to spend eternity being tortured in hell, but instead I believe that everyone will eventually experience fullness of life or salvation. And for certain individuals, if that doesn't take place in this lifetime, I believe it will take place sometime beyond. During the time of Jesus, the conventional thinking of the day was that a lot of people would spend eternity suffering in hell. But there were a couple of exceptions to that. One exception were the Zoroastrians. Perhaps you are aware that the Zoroastrian faith was developed in the area of Persia in the 5th and the 6th centuries before the time of Jesus. And that, of course, is where the current country of Iran is. Now, the Zoroastrians were Universalists. Isn't that wonderful? They believed in Universalism or universal salvation. And so the teaching of Universalism is not just a modern liberal idea, as some people might suggest, but it's been around for a long time, at least for 2,500 years, probably long before that as well. So the Zoroastrians were one exception to the idea of eternal damnation. The other exception was Jesus. Perhaps you could find others as well. But at least one other exception was Jesus. And it's clear to me from many Bible passages that Jesus did not believe in eternal damnation, but did believe in universalism. In the environment, though, where the conventional thinking was that a lot of people would spend eternity suffering in hell, it was sometimes difficult to convince people otherwise. So it seems to me that there were some people who weren't fully converted to Christianity. In other words, they professed to be followers of Jesus, but at the same time continued to believe in the unending suffering of some people in hell. However, a lot of those early Christians were Universalists. In fact, from my study of church history, it seems that it was the majority and probably the vast majority of the early Christians did believe in Universalism. And Clement and Origen of Alexandria were two examples of theologians and leaders who taught Universalism. Others included Gregory of Nyssa, Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, and many, many others as well. As I said, though, there were some people who weren't fully converted to Christianity. The theologian Tertullian was one example of that. He became a Christian at age 40, and he continued to hold on to the belief of the endless suffering of many people beyond death. In fact, Tertullian so relished the idea of people being in hell, which is absurd in itself, but he so relished the idea of the people being in hell and that they would be tortured for their sins. He said one of the best things about heaven would be the superb view of the damned frying in hell. Now, doesn't the thought of that just make you feel good all over? Isn't that astonishing? A person who professed to be a follower of Jesus, a follower of the one who taught so much about love and peace and forgiveness and grace and so on, could so relish the idea of so many people suffering excruciating torment in hell forever. The theologian Augustine was another example of a person who wasn't fully converted to Christianity. He became a Christian at age 32, and he also held on to the belief of the endless suffering of many people beyond death. But Augustine was a pretty decent theologian in some respects. And so it's not surprising that his theology started to become dominant in the church. Now, Augustine lived in the latter part of the 4th century and into the 5th century. So it's not surprising that by the 6th century, there was coming to be quite a controversy over the issue of universalism. In order to resolve this controversy, the Roman Emperor Justinian called a church meeting. It was the 5th Ecumenical Council in the year 553. Now, does it seem a little strange to you that a Roman emperor would call a church meeting? Well, it makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that emperors like to control people. Isn't that a given? Emperors like to control people, and the people had learned that threatening people with eternal damnation was a foolproof means of controlling them. You see, if you can convince people that spending eternity in hell is a real possibility, you've got them where you want them. You can get them to do anything you want by threatening them with eternal damnation. But the problem is, those free-spirited Universalists back then didn't take them seriously. They could threaten them with unending hell all they wanted, and they didn't take it seriously. And so out of frustration, the emperor allied himself with the hellraisers of the day, the people who advocated the unending suffering of people in hell. And together they pushed through a resolution which abolished the teaching of universalism. Now, with all the powers of the church and the state against the teaching of universalism pretty well died out or went dormant or went underground after that. And that lasted for a long time, really for about 1,000 years. But you can't suppress the truth indefinitely, right? Eventually it'll start bubbling up someplace. And that's what happened about 300 years ago. It really was more than 300 years ago that it started. But about 300 years ago, the teaching of universalism started to come back in pretty strong form, with a lot of people starting to believe in it. So that was a very, very significant development in our church history. John Wesley, who was the primary organizer and leader of the Methodist movement in 18th century England, had a very close association with a group of Christians called the Moravians. The Moravians believed in universalism. Isn't that wonderful? Another fine group. But in the early years of his association with the Moravians, Wesley used to argue with them about universalism. He didn't agree with them and argued strenuously against that teaching that they had. But he continued his lifelong association with the Moravians, and it's clear that they eventually wore him down, because Wesley too came to believe in universalism late in his life. Now, I love to tell United Methodist that John Wesley eventually came to believe in universalism. That is because in the United Methodist Church, the most conservative people in our church are the ones who are most likely to reject the teaching of universalism. At the same time, they can often be heard to say, let's go back and reestablish the teachings of John Wesley. And I say, yeah, let's do that. After all, he eventually came to believe in universalism. The American colonies proved to be a particularly fertile ground for the spread of the teaching of universalism. George de Benneville came over from France in 1741. He was a physician, and he did quite a lot to spread the teaching of universalism in western Pennsylvania and New Jersey and in Maryland. George de Benneville came over from France in 1741, and I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused. John Murray came over from England in 1770, and he worked closely with the Quakers and the Baptists in spreading the teaching of universalism throughout the American colonies. It was under Murray's leadership that the Universalist Church in America was organized. During the time of this modern version of this Universalist church, there were some very strong women leaders in the church. One of them was Olympia Brown. And she's the first woman to be ordained by any denomination, when she was ordained in the Universalist Church in 1863. Now, we Methodists started to ordain women in 1956. And I felt really good about that, considering that there's some churches that still don't ordain women. I felt really good about the fact that we started ordaining women in 1956, until I learned that the Universalists had beaten us by about 100 years when they started ordaining women in 1863. Hosea Ballou was the most prominent leader and theologian during his life and ministry. When he died in 1852, the Universalist Church had about 800,000 members. So it was a strong movement, to be sure. The teaching of Universalism hasn't been espoused only by Universalists or Unitarians, for that matter, but it has been espoused by other leaders and theologians of other denominations as well. For example, back in the 19th century, there was the German theologian named Friedrich Schleiermacher. I wonder, how many people here have heard of old Friedrich? Oh, yeah, that's pretty good. That should put you at perhaps above average in terms of knowing about Friedrich Schleiermacher. But anyway, Friedrich Schleiermacher is not a very well-known theologian, but he was a fine theologian and a strong advocate of Universalism. And besides that, I just like to say his name. Friedrich Schleiermacher. That is the coolest name, I think. I just love it. Then in the 20th century, there were other leaders and theologians who taught Universalism. Karl Barth, Paul Tillich, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Leslie Weatherhead, and many others as well. So the teaching of Universalism has a long, rich history. For more than 500 years, think about that, that's a long time. For more than 500 years following the time of Jesus, and then especially again for the last 300 years as well. So you might wonder, why is this such an important issue for me as a United Methodist minister, since that is really not a part of our doctrine in our church to believe in Universalism? Well, it seems to me that the teaching of a God of eternal damnation has prevailed for far too long in most churches and in our society at large, and with devastating consequences. One of the reasons this is important is because the teaching of a God of eternal damnation turns many people away from God. People, for the most part at least, would never ever even consider torturing their own children without end. That is just a crazy idea, because we know that if people torture their own children, we know what happens to them, right? They either are sent to a mental hospital or a prison. Yet they say that that's what God is going to do forever. So it is literally an insane idea that God is going to torture people forever. So, the teaching of a God of eternal damnation turns many people away from God. Sometimes they become atheists. Now, I need to acknowledge that I've learned a lot about atheism from UUs. And I'm grateful. When we went on the road 21 years ago, I knew a little bit about atheism, but I didn't know anything about universal, the UUism, if you will, about UU churches. But anyway, as I've spoken at UU churches around the country, one of the high points of speaking in UU churches is I've met a lot of wonderful atheists. I didn't expect that, but it's great. It's been a great joy to meet so many wonderful atheists. Of course, I've met a lot of wonderful people of a great variety of faiths in UU churches, but for some of them, they find atheism to be a thoughtful, responsible, mature way to approach life, and it works for them. For people for whom atheism works, I really don't have a difficulty. But when people become atheists in other denominations, it is often not such a positive thing. That is because they sometimes still have in the back of their mind the possibility of spending eternity in hell. And if there's no God to rescue them from that plight, then that can lead to despair and meaninglessness. We all want to make the world a better place. And that's what motivates me more than anything else to travel around the country speaking on universalism. We all want to make the world a better place, but it seems to me we're not likely to accomplish very much in that regard as long as the teaching of a God of eternal damnation continues to prevail in most churches and in society at large. And the reason this is so important is because people's perception of God has a powerful and direct influence on how they live their lives. If people believe that God is judgmental and condemning and cruel, it's very, very easy to justify living that same way themselves. It's like the old song, One Tin Soldier goes, "Go ahead and hate your neighbor. Go ahead and cheat a friend. Do it in the name of heaven. You can justify it in the end." Sadly, I see people every day in our own country and around the world seeking to justify evil behavior in the name of heaven, in the name of God. And it's much easier to do that if we believe that God is judgmental and condemning and cruel. On the other hand, if we believe that God is loving and kind and merciful and so on, we're much more likely to exhibit those qualities as well. This is of enormous significance. I believe that if we're going to change the world for the better, perhaps the most important single thing that we need to do is to change people's perception of God. That is of central importance, it seems to me. There's a man named Robert Short who wrote a book called Something to Believe In. And he says, among many things that are worth noting in his book, that people tend to resemble the gods they serve. Isn't that profound? People tend to resemble the gods they serve, and I believe that is true. So in order to change the world for the better, we need to change people's understanding of God from that of being judgmental and cruel to that of loving. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was sometimes criticized because he loved his enemies too much. He was told, "You shouldn't love your enemies, you should seek to destroy them." To which Lincoln replied, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" Isn't that powerful? Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? Abraham Lincoln was a Universalist. He believed in the power of love and the preciousness of each individual, and because of that, he could love even his enemies. And what a difference that made in how he lived his life. It seems to me that we who believe in universalism are called to live the same way, called to rise above being judgmental and cruel in order to transform the world with love. So we who believe in universalism have a wonderful and a powerful message to share with the world, and it's really important that we do so. Again, Robert Short, in his book, Something to Believe In, says there is too much at stake for us to allow ourselves to be intimidated by the wrathful self-righteousness of the hell-raising gloomy doomies. Isn't that a mouthful? There is too much at stake for us to allow ourselves to be intimidated by the wrathful self-righteousness of the hell-raising gloomy doomies. And then he goes on to say, therefore, our witness to them should be just as aggressive and unambiguous as theirs has been to us. Fundamentalists can be intimidating, can't they? They go around quoting the Bible and asking people whether or not they are saved. They exhibit such confidence, so they can be intimidating. But I say, let's not be intimidated by them. After all, we are the ones with the good news. They instead spread a concept that is divisive and leads to cruel and inhumane behavior and justifies abuse. With their understanding, it is really no big deal to torture people, whether it's at Guantanamo Bay or whatever. After all, they believe that God will torture people forever, so surely if it's okay for God to do it, surely it must be okay for us to do it. Besides, the torture that they say that God will inflict upon people, or that the torture that we might inflict upon people, whether that's waterboarding or whatever, is nothing compared to the torture that they say that God will inflict upon people in a literal lake of fire, no less. So, we who believe in the power of love and the preciousness of each individual, we who believe in universalism have a wonderful message to share with the world. So it's important that we not be intimidated. The teaching of a God of eternal damnation leads to wars and racism and oppression and abuse, while the spread of the teaching of universalism leads to equality, respect, love, and dignity for all. So I say, let's not be intimidated. Instead, let us freely and boldly proclaim to the world the wonderful message of universalism, and the world will be infinitely better off because of it. Amen.
And now if you would join in the closing hymn of number 414. May we be comforted by the easy, accepting part of our faith, and in that comfort, nurture the strength required to live into the challenge of universalism. May our actions shine the light of radical hospitality that is inherent in our universalist heritage and is so sorely needed for healing the brokenness in our fragile, precious world. Kat, if you would like to come to extinguish the chalice. If you join with the words on the chalice extinguishing, we extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. As our worship comes to an end, please join me in saying the words for, we already did that. Sorry, that got repeated on there. So now the postlude, yay.